Hello, good evening, and welcome here tonight. It's fantastic to see so many people joining us online for this next session of 5 by 15. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Emma Barnett here to talk about her paperback edition of It's About Bloody Time, period, which apparently you can say both ways. Now, Emma needs not a lot of introductions, but I'll do it just the same. She's the new and really brilliant host of Woman's Hour. She's also done Newsnight and Late Night Last with Lauren Laverne, and she's done political reporting, emotional reporting, and she's stood up for women in a quite remarkable way. And this book is, well, for me, it was an absolute eye-opener because, as Emma and I think we'll discuss, it really is and has been one of the last taboos talking about menstruation. Emma, of course, is very well known for the fact that she's the first person who ever said on live television, "I'm not feeling too great, I'm menstruating." And in a way, the world stopped. So there's lots of stories in this book, but it's now been out for a year, Emma. And how has the reaction been? Were you nervous the night before it came out? Did you think what did you think?
I mean, I think it was, I remember talking to an MP who said, a male MP, "Oh, what have you written about?" And I said, periods. And he said, "Oh, which period of time?" And I said, "No, the one in my pants." And I think that the look on his face stayed with me. And I think I just thought it shouldn't have taken this long. There have been other books, but they've tended either to be about your health, so sort of those biology style books, and there have also been about the history of advertising to do with periods, which I found fascinating and drew upon. And there are a couple of what I would call more sort of hippie, woo-woo, go into the woods vibes, which is also, you know, there's a place for that. But there hadn't been a place to kind of bring together why there was the shame that we have, but also what I would say are a lot of untold stories. Because if something's taboo, not only can you not talk about it for very serious reasons, but you also can't laugh about it, you know. And there are some incredibly funny stories that come along with having a period every month. And as one guy said to me who simulated having a period, perhaps we'll come to that, it's a lot of logistics. So there's a lot going on that we have to deal with. I wasn't particularly nervous per se, but I think there are moments where I was on, for instance, Radio 2 the other morning talking to Dermot O'Leary about periods in the morning, you know, sort of 10 a.m. And I did think, well, this is real Middle England right now, possibly having, you know, about to have a bit of late breakfast. And here I am doing it. But so it's only moments like that where I wonder, what's the reaction? But then I get messages from people saying, "Thanks for saying that, actually. Never heard it said before."
Yeah. Why do you think it's still a taboo? I mean, I think you've done an absolutely dynamite job of lifting this taboo, but why do you think it's been, in a way, the last one, or feels like the last one?
Yeah, I think it does feel. I mean, there's a practical reason, which is I think we are taught as a society to fear blood. Blood is scary, it's dangerous. It happens in the darkness of our pants. There's also that element of it. It's to do with our vaginas. I think in some way it's been made sexual. Certainly, I was struck again being in the loos the other day in a service station on the way home from Norfolk. I saw, you know, condoms, tampons, vibrating ring for her pleasure. And I thought, they don't all go together for me. I would much rather there was some sanitary provision in here over there, and with the loo roll and the soap. And I think the other reason is it's to do with our vaginas, and that also means it's therefore to do with women, and women's role in society is still developing. And whether that's cultural influences that have put us in a different place and marked us other, as you will well know with all of your pioneering work, or religion. You know, religion still has a huge, invisible but very important power.
Sure, and I mean, I think that there's a lot of really interesting chunks in your book about, say, women in Nepal or women in other societies who are literally banished from the home or told that they can't cook food while they're menstruating. So there is a big culture that is completely male dominated to keep women in their place.
Yes, and I, you know, although I sort of try and not make jokes of those situations, definitely not, but I say things like, you know, we don't curdle mayonnaise to the people of Madagascar who believe that. And in our country, we're obviously very lucky that we can think that that's preposterous. But obviously, it's not the same in Madagascar. And I'm trying to, you know, look at where we are. And it's predominantly a book, I would say, about Western women. But it's one eye on those societies, because some elements of those societies are still present in our society. And I want to not forget that this is a very long road that other women are nowhere near the start line of.
So you had obviously a fantastic mother in terms of, you have a great story, which maybe you could share with us, about when you first got your period and you were in a department store called Kendall's, if I remember rightly.
Yes, in House of Fraser in Manchester,
yes,
is the sort of the brand name. No, but it was called Kendall's, well remembered. Yes, I was up there on the first or second floor, looking around the clothes with my mum, and I went to the loo, and there something was in my pants I didn't understand. And I said out to her, "What's this?" And she said, "Oh, you've started your period." And she just ran round the floor where all the women were selling jeans and clothes, shouting, "Has anyone got a pad? My daughter's started." And it was a sort of celebration, excitement. Meanwhile, I'm still sat there not understanding anything really. And, that's the point also about education. It often happens after you've had your period. I was 10, nearly 11. And she took me for a hot chocolate. And it was a really good moment of, welcome to the club, swiftly followed by, because she had extremely painful periods, my first day was the best day of my menstrual career. Went downhill from there on in. You'll probably be like me and it'll be awful. And so it wasn't something to celebrate overall, but the arrival of it was certainly marked with the opposite of shame.
That's incredibly nice, because I'm older than you, and when I didn't get my period until I was nearly 13, but I was in the upstairs lavatory at home and I screamed out for my mother, who immediately shouted, "You've got the curse," and then immediately relayed this bit of information down the stairs in a very loud voice to my father. And then there was a completely frozen next hour or so while my mother went to town to buy something. And it was immediately, because of the name, an issue of shame and an issue that you didn't want to talk about. And all those years that we were running Spare Rib, it was one, we wrote about abortions, we wrote about sex, we wrote about all sorts of things. We didn't write about that. And it is, even among women, is what's interesting to me, is that there is a sense that they keep it hidden.
Yes. No, and when you told me that about Spare Rib, which I thought had gone everywhere, and it pretty much has, let's be honest, and had, I was really surprised, because I don't think it should be like that. Hence, obviously, why I've started looking into this, and then it culminated with a book. But I do understand, which I know we also spoke briefly about, why feminists who we owe so much to, when forging their way into the workplace, when trying to make their way in society, certainly if we call it the second wave, didn't want to say anything about anything that would make us as women seem less than or different. I can fully understand that, but I think we are in a different place now, and I think our health certainly deserves the openness. And actually, it's a matter of money as well. We need to be open about it so that the investment goes towards research around particular conditions that only women have, that we know so little about, and we don't know how to help people, and also give women a better quality of life. But you're so right that women do it to each other. There's a kind of, we're so good at sparing men's blushes a lot of the time that we internalize a lot of the issues. I know women who've told me they have a special section of the bathroom. It's locked away. I mean, like it's drugs or something dangerous to the other members of the house. And I also remember that when I did say, I'm menstruating right now and it really hurts on Sky News, not only did Nick Ferrari, the broadcaster, a good friend of mine, Graham Lasso, the former footballer, they all look like they vomited in their mouths and swallowed it, but so did Rachel Johnson, so did June Sarpong. I've spoken about it with them afterwards, the broadcasters and journalists. And they and especially Rachel said to me afterwards, I should have been better about that. I'm really sorry, but I've never seen anyone do it like that before. And I just reacted.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's sort of not, if you'd said I've got a blinding headache, everyone would have been able to say, "Oh God, I'm sorry." But you're sort of tongue-tied with this. But you had a really tough time with an undiagnosed, genuinely proper illness, didn't you? I mean, did you think all young girls' periods were that bad? Did you think you were a universal sufferer as such?
Well, I thought I consider myself. And again, all of this, by the way, I've had to undo, but this sort of try and have a stoic nature. I'm from the north. I don't take sick days. Nothing will stop me. I staggered in after my jab, even though I felt awful to broadcast on Women's Hour, all these things. But I thought I wasn't very good at handling it, therefore I was weak. So I sort of wrote myself off because I thought everybody else must be having this level of pain.
Right.
The moment I sort of realized it wasn't that normal, I started going to the doctors. And that's when I started trying different pills, but the pills didn't agree with me. They don't always agree with people. I always say at this point, if the pill comes up, apart from the fact that women have accepted being chemically castrated since the 60s, because we really don't want to have to get pregnant or have that risk, as well as we take it for other reasons. You know, there's still no male pill, because every time they start a trial with men say, I don't feel well, and they stop the trial. So let's just remember that. But here I am trying to take all these different pills, and nothing was changing. And finally, I did find a pill that was okay, and it masked a condition till I started trying for a baby, and we were not getting pregnant. And my friend, not even a doctor I was seeing who happens to be a doctor, when I couldn't sit up one day properly at lunch, said, has anyone ever suggested you might have something called endometriosis? And to my shame, I didn't even know how to spell it. I didn't know what it was. It sounded very frightening, but the thought I could actually have a disease, an illness, had never crossed my mind, because I'd only been told I was unlucky and sent home with strong painkillers.
Wow.
And it was 21 years later.
How old were you?
31.
Well, so right,
31.
21 years. And how many doctors had you seen who had just given you another paracetamol as such?
More than 10.
That's just astonishing. So when you
and
discovered the diagnosis, I mean, it must have been quite a relief.
So the only way to be diagnosed, and I make a good mention of endometriosis in the book, but it's very particular, of course, but it is widespread. You know, 1 in 7 women have it at least. But when you are diagnosed, the only way you can be diagnosed is after keyhole surgery. So you go in, you sign off on them operating and trying to take it out if it is in there. And so you wake up, and it's a very odd thing, because in my case, the gentleman said to me, yes, you had it, and yes, I've lasered it out of you, or as best as I can. And I did feel like, oh, there was something wrong. You know, I did feel like I wasn't mad. I had felt weak, less than my fellow woman, and mad, like it was all in my head. But you get to a point when you are in such pain, because just to say, I came off the pill, and that's when I had my natural periods back, and the natural periods, and it's a progressive disease, had come back even worse. So I was on my knees. And I'm actually, if I'm honest, Rosie, and to all of you, I'm really ill right now again with it, and I'm considering I might have to have more surgery. And that's really upsetting and difficult to deal with. I've been so ill broadcasting the last month or so, but I'm very lucky I have a sedentary job. You know, I don't have to stack shelves, I don't have to move boxes, I can sit, and sitting is one of the best things for it.
So what do you think? I mean, I know that you publicly said that you don't agree with ideas of menstrual leave, and I have to say I have huge ambivalence about it as well. I mean, I think it's really, really, really difficult, this subject. But how do you think that as a society, I mean, menstruation's a real thing, something real and really amazing is happening to your body, which we actually ought to be very proud of, the whatever it is, 30 fertile years that every woman is given, and everybody should be proud of that. But in fact, A, we're not, B, we don't research it, and C, we still don't, despite your book, seem to me to be quite certain how we deal with it.
So the reason I say that is because I think the policies that exist within human resources already cover if you aren't well. The issue is, there are a few issues. And I want to actually separate, if I can, having an illness like endometriosis, because that's chronic, and that's, you know, akin to chronic pain and chronic other issues. Actually, some women really suffer with their periods, and it's only for their period, but it is, for instance, headaches or backaches, or, you know, just elements. It doesn't stop them from working, but they don't feel their best, and perhaps they need to work slightly differently. And, you know, it took a pandemic and for men to be involved, for the hard fought battle for flexible work, or being trusted to work at home, that women have been asking for years and years and years, for others to be then trusted as a society during the pandemic. I find that quite ironic. I think we are going to move into, actually, the only silver lining I can see of this pandemic is perhaps we might be trusted to still do our jobs, not being looked at. So I think that's a big thing that might help. I think when we did a study on this for my old 5 Live show, that we found that most women were happier to say that they had diarrhea if they wanted a day off or some time or to work differently than a period. Now, diarrhea is way more, I would say, grim than a natural process. You know, that's a kind of, I'm not trying to poo shame anyone here, but for me, I think it's really interesting. Women would rather say they've got the squits than their period, which is natural, and what's going to happen that month if they have them. So I believe we're at a bit of a precipice where we're starting to bring our whole selves to work, and we're starting to try and be more open. But you know, I think there'll always be people who take the mick. There'll always be people who Skype and all of that, but they are the minority. And I always remind people that, you know, women not only work when they're pregnant, up to being 9 months pregnant, you know, running a marathon in their body. Women want to work, they can work, they will work, but they want to be able to say what's going on with them as well.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so sorry that you're going through another rough time with this. I didn't realize that endometriosis presumably it just climbs back and starts doing its thing again, despite having been pregnant and had it once sorted out.
I had really hoped, having had IVF and then been very, very lucky for that to have worked, extremely lucky, that it would improve. It didn't on either occasion. And I also have another condition called adenomyosis. And I only even mention this because, hello to anyone else who has it, that's in your womb. The only way to get rid of that, I'm told, but it won't necessarily cure all the issues, is a hysterectomy. But the reason I mention it is when it was diagnosed, which was actually very recent, in the last couple of years, the man said to me, "Oh, don't worry about that. We know even less than about endometriosis. It's the elephant in the womb." And I forgot to laugh. So, I mean, I'm laughing with you now because I can't quite believe he said it to me. So the bedside manner of some of the people I've met on this journey has also something to be desired.
So yes, you've done a lot on Women's Hour, which has been completely great about issues around women's health. And certainly like Caroline Criado Perez wrote a huge amount. I was incredibly struck by the fact that, you know, we've all been brought up to think that if we have a pain in our left arm, we're having a heart attack, except if you're 50% of the population and you're women. That doesn't happen. So you had what became quite a controversial interview with Nadine Dorries the other day, didn't you? Well, a few weeks ago.
Yes, no, so the health minister was on, and they are doing, the government, what sounds like a really important bit of work around women's health, the women's health strategy. So they've invited women, more than 100,000 women have given evidence. What they then do with that, we need to hold them to account with, you know, what they're actually going to do. But I think there was a very key question for Nadine, which, based on her previous comments after other consultations, which is that she talked about women needing to advocate for themselves. And I also talk about, you know, I think in this country, because we have such a fondness and a love for the NHS, we're so grateful to be seen. And we are, especially women, we don't want to bother anyone. We don't want to put upon anyone. I know I'm stereotyping, there'll be some women who walk in and demand answers, but because we don't pay for it, I actually think we don't treat it ever like we are a client, if you see what I mean. And doctors are still on a pedestal, and I do feel that, as many people will, after the last 15 months. However, they also get things wrong. So while I understand the minister's point of view, I was also very struck by the strength of reaction from people getting in touch, saying this is patient shaming. You know, the idea that you have to go in there and say, I'm not leaving until you tell me what's wrong with me, or however you want to describe advocacy. Because the other thing to say, and I had a very good guest on that day as well, who's written a book about called Unwell Women, Eleanor Cleghorn, is you are, when you're ill, she didn't get diagnosed with lupus. Most people who have lupus are women. Most people who have an autoimmune disorder are women. The majority of autoimmune, which I didn't know. When you are ill, you are at the worst point to advocate for yourself, you know, regardless of being a woman. Actually, you know, men have this as well. You need almost someone else sometimes. You know, I'm sure you've supported friends and family to come in with you. So while it's one thought, I don't think it was necessarily that popular with a lot of women, because, and we had to test that, we had to challenge that, which I did do so, because also it calls into question the front line of our services.
Sure, that's a really interesting thing, that the fact that it's free, you feel that you can't really complain about the service you get. And I mean, I would say that even if someone like you, suffering the way you did, that it took you that long and that many doctors to get to a diagnosis of a condition that, as you say, one in 7 women suffer, seems a terrible indictment of how the medical system really looks after women.
Yeah, and that's why I wrote the book. If I'm completely honest, I did that thing unwittingly, really, on Sky News, and got loads of people in touch, men coming up to me saying, oh, my wife saw that and felt it was a really cool thing, or whatever. And then when I got diagnosed, because I did that and I didn't know I had a disease, and when I got diagnosed, I thought, my goodness, the only thing that I think I'm particularly, I hope, talented at is trying to get people to answer a question. Mm-hmm. It's what I do. I try to hold people to account. And if I could not get answers, I actually feel that other people must be having this, and not just with this condition, with all sorts of conditions. And there's studies out there from the NHS showing women go around with all sorts of issues unresolved to do with their gynecology, when they could have a much better quality of life. And I think that we're in a situation where we need to change, hello to your doggy, we need to change the idea that women and pain, go together like bread and butter.
Absolutely. I mean, you have a really intriguing chapter on the history of advertising around tampons and sanitary towels, and as I say, we used to call them STs, a name that I think you haven't come across. Anyway, there's another name for you for all these weird euphemisms we have for all these products and conditions. But the advertising, I think that I certainly learnt about my own anatomy completely from the leaflet inside a box of Tampax. And then, of course, the ads did start appearing on the TV, but they were, like, I think, like you say, at some point, they were always a woman on roller skates wearing incredibly small white shorts. And this feeling, you think, I'd never do that. And that, again, it's that feeling of trying to always hide it, isn't it?
Hide it and be aspirational almost with it. This idea women can do anything. And yes, we can. I mean, Paula Radcliffe set a new marathon record while menstruating. She was in a lot of pain. She had cramps. It's not that we can't, although she's quite an exceptional case. Most of us wouldn't feel like doing that. And she probably had to go and do that. And women and menstruating in sport, I know we might talk a little bit about what's changed since I first wrote the book, but for instance, women's football teams are now starting to look at women's cycles, to try and play to their best strengths when training them. We, for a long time, just tried to ignore that periods exist. And like you say, the authors of the narrative, the public narrative around periods, are the people trying to make money out of them.
Yeah.
And I'm not against there being choice, but there's no other part of society where I think we'd accept that, that is the narrative that we get. And, if, and as I know you're in the House of Lords, you see how laws get made. But if there had been more women around the table when they were not even deciding whether periods were a luxury and the product should be taxed or not, which the tampon tax row, which lots of people hopefully now know about, but going before that, when they mandated that all public toilets had to have loo roll and soap, do you not think that if women had been legislators, that tampons and sanitary towels or whatever was available at the time would have also been included? Because it can start at any time, and it is to help us in the toilet with whatever was going on with us. It just wouldn't be that loo roll was the only thing was free.
Yes, no, that it is. Everyone has terrible stories of being caught out in white dresses. I mean, I am no exception to that, and it is. I remember it. I mean, it's a really long time ago, but I do remember it with absolutely crippling embarrassment and a feeling of kind of backing out of. I remember backing out of a posh drawing room once, and cringing, and then of course not having anything with me, and again having to make do with some loo roll, and just being completely discombobulated for the next few hours, and then, well, as I say, remembering it all those years later. Period poverty is a quite extraordinary thing in our society. I mean, I chair something called Feeding Britain, and we, in our social supermarkets and in the food banks we work with, we always put sanitary products in, and it seems extraordinary that A, that they cost so much, and B, that, as you say, they're not completely freely available everywhere. I know you can now get them in schools, but it doesn't help in the holidays right now. It's a very unfair situation.
No one helped. No one knew, so no one helped, is the quote from one of the women I spoke to in the book, who has, I think, is the most powerful quote about it, because no one does know. So how can they help? And there isn't an easy provision there. I mean, since the book was published, Scotland has become the first country in the world to make sanitary products, which some people, by the way, hate the name of sanitary products, like it's unclean, but let's just call them that for the moment. Has made them free, but it's we're the fifth largest economy in the world. We should not be having people missing school, having girls roll up their socks in their pants, but they don't want to make their mum, who's not got very much money, have to pick between, a meal that week and having what they need as well. And that is a really unforeseen circumstance of having a market on this stuff, that and the shame bundled in with it. And I think one of the most startling things I learned when researching the book was about how homeless women, they had to train. This amazing charity called Flow Aid went into shelters and had to train the volunteers there not to give out this, just to have the sanitary products, the tampon. They usually actually have sanitary pads, because tampons and you couldn't do moon cups or any of that for homeless women, because they don't have the place to go and necessarily make things clean enough and all of that. So they put out what they can for the women, but they just had them on the counter, and they said, no, you've got to hand them to them, because men were taking them to use them to have power over the women on the street.
Oh, that's so terrible. How many people do you reckon in the UK are affected by period poverty at the moment?
I don't think we've got any figures, because it's an unknown, it's a known unknown. There's so much shame about it. And Plan UK, I've quoted some figures in the book about one of their studies, but even they, the girls' rights charity, say we just don't know. I mean, they're in food banks more and more, sanitary products, and what you've just described is more and more common. They're also in schools, like you say, and you've seen them now in supermarket bins if people are going in again. But I hate to think during the pandemic, where there were fewer places to go into, what went on. There are brilliant charities doing really, really good work. Bloody Good Period specifically helps female refugees. I do think there's been a proliferation of activism and charities in this space in recent times, but I really hope that we don't have to know how many, because the problem is solved in other ways.
Thank you all very much for those who put in questions, and please keep them coming, because I'm going to come to all your questions pretty soon. But you've got some also extraordinary stories in that book. I was particularly intrigued by the story of the attempt to Dragon's Den and the reaction of Peter Lewis to, will you tell us that tale?
Yes, Peter Jones, I believe, is the dragon. No, I'm making sure I've got it right.
I mixed up the shops.
No, it's fine. Yes, there was a brand that went in, he wanted to do like a subscription, sanitary towel subscription service, a tampon subscription service, and he just started giggling the minute they mentioned it. And it's a huge market. They didn't get investment, and it became a news story. People could look it up, you could see the clip, and as a grown man not recognizing the value of such an amazing opportunity potentially. Whenever they say, oh, how big's the market? Well, I mean, it's a pretty good market to want to get into. And at that time, I think they were ahead of the curve, that brand. I also think, just to say, going back to what you said about sanitary brands being the ones who wrote the narrative, whether it's Courtney Cox being the first person to say tampon on TV and wearing leg warmers and lycra like we all want to. Nothing wrong with the leg warmers. But I also think it's fascinating that some of the most modern companies have written periods out of the script. Apple in 2015, when launching its one-stop health kit app to track everything about your body, left out the menstrual cycle. Fitbit, which has been around for 12 years or so, one of its most requested features didn't get added until 10 years after the company launched, which was to also track your cycle. These are modern companies that either forget about periods because perhaps they haven't got women on the board designing things, or they just don't even deem them important enough to include. We just got a blood drop emoji only in the last year or so, emoji being one of our new modern languages. I won't tell the whole story now, but it's an extraordinary story of subterfuge as to how the women who basically became activists managed to get a blood draw when we've got 12 trains. So, I mean, there's stuff going on now. I think what's interesting is some people have said to me, why do I need to read a whole book about it? You don't, you can do what you want. I'm not here to say whatever you want. I believe in your freedom of interest. But what they mean by that sometimes is I know everything there is to know. And I genuinely thought I did. And then I just scraped the surface and got some of the most extraordinary stories about now, about today, about businesses, about people. Gordon Brown couldn't say tampon only 8 years ago or whatever at the dispatch box. David Cameron laughed and sniggered when he mentioned it. From public life through to the corporate world, through to how we treat each other. I was quite astounded. The more I went into it, the more I just thought, what's going on?
No, the story about Apple and indeed about Fitbit are quite astonishing. There was a good thing on the radio the other day, though, about a young woman saying that she had once put her cycle onto her laptop into some app or something, and then she removed it. But then she started getting, every time in her cycle where she got to the ovulation moment, she would get an advert from Clear Blue. So it's a very spooky feeling that years afterwards they had connected and they wanted to send her the pregnancy test. And you just think it's kind of very odd that you have information. It's just, anyway, it's but the emoji story is really interesting. And there was a period, a point when people were using the Japanese flag, isn't that right?
Yeah, so I was alerted to this by a younger group of readers, and they told me, yeah, I'm on my Japan. So the white flag with the red dot was substituted in lieu of there being a blood droplet. And the blood droplet is not there because of periods. It's there because it was proposed by NHS Blood. So, you know, the story of how that happened is fascinating. But I do think the modern companies, the modern language still shows our squeamishness, and it shouldn't be there at all. And also, as I said earlier, I do think there is fun and joy. I mean, I know you said you were, and I totally recognize that feeling when you didn't have a sanitary pad, an ST with you at that time. But I tell a story in the book about meeting someone for a coffee, a work colleague, and she got her tampon stuck, and she knew I would be all right with her ringing me. And she was like, I'm in the loo, Emma, I'm going to be a bit late, but I don't know what to do. And we were giggling our heads off / panicking. And I was in a taxi, and the driver, because all I thought to say, I'd never said the phrase before, was bear down, bear down. And this guy at the end of the call went, were you helping someone give birth? And I said, yeah, to a tampon. And, you know, there's that through to the woman who I read about it in the Telegraph only a few months back, who'd been wondering why her tampon didn't work, and she'd been putting it in with the applicator till the age of 30. And, you know, that's because she hasn't asked anyone. And also, back to the guy who tried to have a period, they got this guy to simulate having one for BuzzFeed, where he wore a beet juice pack and it dripped into his pants. But he was like, how do you women learn how to do all this stuff? And when I read the article about this woman, I thought, well, we don't. We just muddle along and we figure it out piecemeal.
So you also tackle the whole subject of sex and periods. And just before we move on to the last lot of things, I think about new pressures on young women, tell us the story about poor old Gillian, or good old Gillian, whichever way we want to look at it. It is fantastically funny.
You know what, it is, and this is a story that anyone who has read the book has said, I will never forget this story for the rest of my life. And I made contact with this woman in America, and she was very kind to let me print it. But in short, Gillian, so by the way, I never expected to write a period sex chapter. Obviously, as someone with a period disease, the thought of that is not good for me. I'm very happy for other people. That's where I was going to leave it. And then I met a woman who coined the term for men who like sex with women on their period, which was so brilliant, I had to look into it. She coined the term bloodhounds. And by the way, she wrote that for a New York publication who would only put it online, not in the print publication, which I thought was very interesting. Anyway, turns out it's a whole thing I didn't know anything about. So I researched it and interviewed people. And Gillian had sex with a colleague of hers. They were actors, and they went back to Jeffrey's house, and she was a bit scared and a bit worried because she was on He goes off to have a shower. She turns the lights on. It looks like a crime scene, handprint on the wall, bloodied handprint on the wall. She is mortified. So she obviously does what you just do. I'm slightly joking here, but bless her. She steals his bed linen, whacks it all in the rucksack, and goes on the subway and leaves mortified without saying goodbye. Only problem is 9/11 happened not long before, and they were doing spot checks on the subway, and she got approached by a cop who said, "Open your bag, I need to see what's in." Genuinely considered whether it would be better to go to jail for what would look like a murder than not show this man her period sex sheets. I'm very happy to report she got frog marched back to Jeffrey's house to corroborate the story, because she did open the bag and Jeffrey saved the day.
Well, we love Jeffrey. Well, problems with your sound, so I hope that
oh no.
Yeah, you were slightly wobbling. No, let's get anyway. Yeah, you've slightly changed position. Maybe we'll come back. But it's a very
Are we okay now? Is that better?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Anyway, I know you've done a lot on Woman's Hour about the kind of, the periods were one kind of pressure on women. I mean, there are lots of other pressures, particularly on young women, about Botox and treatments and, what you should and shouldn't do to your looks. I mean, are we still, do you see anything moving to make it less pressured on young women?
Well, we had Caitlin Moran on today. Can you hear me? Is it okay now? Has it gone better? I'm hoping it has.
Yeah.
Yeah? I'm very sorry.
It's all right. It's not your fault. I mean, the internet's a little bit wobbly. No, let's keep chatting.
Okay. I was going to see if I could do some of my own tech support here. But I don't think it's going in the right direction. No. I'm very sorry to say, because I think of the pressures of the internet, which I did not have fully. I had it a bit growing up. I'm straddling both. But I worry that is distorting absolutely everything for girls and for boys. And that is a really big problem. So I'd love to be able to say I think it's going in the right direction. Of course, feminism and activism and all those sorts of things has become more accessible. But I also think growing up where we think online is real is so problematic in so many different ways.
Yes. And how do you think we deal with that, though? Because I go to South America a lot with the Hay Festival, and it's extraordinary there because you can legitimately take out a bank loan to have like a nose job, which is extremely popular in Colombia, and on the grounds that it's seen as the same way that you invested in, say, taking a degree in biology or a medical degree. It's seen as an investment in your future. It's a very scary kind of development that so much is hinged around looks.
Yes, and I think if you are older, you are able again to ignore that a bit. You are able to think everything is okay until it comes and hits you in the face and you have contact with those who are coming through behind. I think almost the biggest thing to solve is to bring our offline selves in line with our online selves and vice versa, which hasn't really happened. I had hoped, I used to be a technology correspondent, but the way we behaved offline would be mirrored online. But if anything, I feel we're in a really weird moment that I'm hoping we're going to come through, where people behave incredibly badly and differently to who they are in the real world. And then that makes people feel, that almost that there's no point sometimes, and quite hopeless, and that everything has to be perfect and documented. And I just think we're going to have to learn and to teach resilience around that and not just ignore it, but actually not just for children, for adults as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I find it a very scary state. I'm going to take a few of the questions. So Sarah's written in to say that her daughter was not diagnosed with endometriosis, a totally new illness to her, until her 40s, but was hospitalized at 12 to 13 with severe pains, which resolved into her first period. So thank you for that. And Claire O says, have you seen a change recently in the funding for the area? I was diagnosed at 33, such a long time to find out painful periods weren't normal. I'd never heard of it. So I'm pleased to hear it in the news more, and so sorry to hear you're suffering. The more noise we make, the more funding we'll get. Regina asks, as someone who talks about her period with other women and men, how do you suggest I can take further action to reduce the stigmatization and period poverty? I'm also open to bigger projects. What would you say to Regina?
So yeah, and then I think I've got something brief to say on funding. With reducing the stigma, I think it's good to start with the most difficult person in your life when you're next on your period. And if they ask how you are, you say, oh, however you are, I'm having a really difficult period, or I'm having an interesting period. And then sit with the silence. And I think often we don't, the way to change a taboo or a stigma is to start with the people where it's a problem. And they're the people that we always ignore or try and skirt around. So I think you can do things with humor. I'm not saying to make a joke of it necessarily, but I think you can bring a few people with you on a serious journey with some humor. I think you shouldn't hide your products at home if you're already doing that. And I think you should be able to be free with your colleagues as well if you have that kind of relationship. And in terms of helping, those charities, a couple I mentioned, Flow Aid, Bloody Good Period, and they're always looking for donations and volunteers as far as I can see. They're not those charities which are, we've got enough volunteers, thank you very much. So I think there are some really good, I think it's called the Red Box Project, which was for schools. Depends, I suppose, what your interest area is, but there's quite a few that you can get involved with now.
That's great. So and someone who's chosen to be anonymous saying, how did you power through the pressure and imposter syndrome when you were breaking into broadcasting, a job where you have to be confident, especially while you were enduring endometriosis? I mean, I've often wondered about that too. I mean, it must have been incredibly difficult, and actually it must be really difficult today.
Do you know what? Well, there's just two bits there, isn't there, about imposter syndrome, but also dealing with pain. The only time my job becomes difficult in terms of the pain, apart from it coursing through my body, is at Newsnight. Is the first 2.5 minutes I'm on my feet, and it's actually quite hard sometimes to do the opening sequence. And I remember one time I kept having to sort of sit down just before we went live, because every bit of broadcasting I do is live, which I love. And adrenaline's probably not great for a body in pain. I think I've been told that, but I do feel that my job is one of the greatest gifts for my condition, ironically, because although it's lots of pressure, it takes me completely out of myself for the time that I'm on air. I'm so focused, I'm so in the zone. I've had to read, I've had to understand a brief, I've had to read a book, I've had whatever I've had to do. And then my brain, if you don't work, this is the case, some women really can't, but I find not working almost harder because I'm then just thinking about the pain.
Yeah, that's
sometimes it spurs me on. If you want to cut through something and somebody's not saying.
I completely understand that. Yes. Eileen Togneri says, in answer to, with our conversation about the NHS and the feeling of it being free, I mean, she's saying the NHS is not free, that we pay for it. Unrelated to that comment, I hear so often that men medics are unsympathetic to women's conditions. Do you think we should insist that our consultants in gynecology and breast surgery should be women? No.
Really interesting. I knew someone was going to pick me up on NHS being free, and I almost went back to correct and clarify. Of course, it's not free, but what I mean is it's free at the point of entry into the service. But no, it's very much not free. But equally, I think there's a culture around our NHS of being very, very grateful, which can lead you to behaving differently if you were in a service where you were really, in lots of people's situations, if you were fighting for your life for it, if you were trying to be heard and you're not being heard. There's a long history of men dismissing women in pain as hysterical, as not, telling the truth, and we still have it going on. But there are also, the majority of GPs are now female. They are the gatekeepers through. I think we're at that point now. Sorry, the majority, excuse me, of, I want to make sure I get that right, the majority of those being trained are female, and we are now in that process of it becoming that way. But I don't think we should have to insist on seeing women, no. I think we should insist on men and women getting better training and well acquainted with our bodies.
Yes. Yes. No, I completely agree with you about that. I mean, otherwise it'll become even more sort of pigeonholed. Another person here has asked, for me and many friends in my 40s, the actual menstruation has become secondary compared to the PMT. I feel like this is also taboo and something women are shamed for and derided for, rather than accepted as a natural part of a woman's cycle. I think
I mean,
on that, I'd say also there is a kind of belief that it's sort of one size fits all. Yeah.
Anything where you have to admit that you're not quite right and something isn't functioning the way you would like it to, or you aren't feeling good, we still, as I was saying, I made the error of feeling about myself that it was weak, it was something to pretend wasn't happening. We do it to ourselves and we have it done to us as well. And I think it is a huge taboo. Some people even deny it's a thing. You know, the fact that it's you are different and you are having stresses and strains and tension. So I fully endorse that being, I agree with that rather being a taboo. And I do think that is something that we should find language for and talk more about.
Yes. Teresa Scherfers asks you, she's asked the question, does your book discuss having penetrative sex during your period and men's and women's attitudes and feelings towards it? Well, I can actually say that the answer is yes. You write very frankly,
yes,
that, which I think is also really good, and that about how different women have different feelings, as do different men, and that in the same way that actually every woman's periods are different in terms of how they feel. That seems a kind of very okay. This is an individual thing.
Yes, and I mean, as some women view it as a test, if men will be okay with that and not be reviled. Some women run for the hills at the thought of it, and some men do it to help women. So there's a whole, I think there was about 8 different sections of people that I found around this, and I'm sure there's even more. I found that becoming one of the longest chapters, despite me never thinking I was going to write that one, as well as the chapter not long after it about what people miss about their periods when they're gone. You know, I love learning and hearing from women who mourn the loss of their periods, because for me, you will all be invited. We're having a party, there'll be Bloody Marys, and tampons will be the stirrers of the drinks. But my point is, I wanted to hear about what it's like at the end of your menstrual career as well, never mind, you know, getting through it. Because I think somebody said to me recently, which I loved, was we so often, and it's a really great period, and we leave them frozen in time there as things that almost just happen to you when you're very young. Almost like periods are a teenage issue, but they're with you for a long time.
Yes, no, they very much walk through life with you, and it's true. I mean, I suppose when I think about it, I do think of teenage years. Now, a number of people have emailed into, because you had a slight sound issue at the end of the Jeffrey and Gillian story. So what did Jeffrey say when the policeman arrived with poor old Gillian and her rucksack with its bloody sheets?
I'm not going to move because apparently that's making it worse. So I'm just going to say really still during the story, but I do get excited. Jeffrey said she hasn't murdered anyone. We just had period sex.
So we didn't murder anyone, we just had period sex. And the policeman went home.
That's it.
And I suppose the other question is, did Jeffrey and Gillian strike up a long-lasting, loving relationship?
I'm happy to say that they stayed together for some months and then they amicably split.
Okay. Emma, could you have a go at going back to your Wi-Fi, or maybe even turning off your video, because we're getting a lot of crackles.
I am sorry about that. Let me just.
We sort of lost you for the minute now. Hello. Well, there's some great questions coming in here about, I really particularly like this contribution from Vicky Murray about, can you imagine a future when our periods are seen as a superpower, that we all have cycle awareness, and so do our families and our bosses, so that they know when we're at our best and when we need to have a rest, and that rest time is when we plan, dream, and create a better world, free from distraction and childcare and all those things. That's why all the religions banish women during their period. This is the most powerful time for a woman, but the patriarchy didn't and doesn't want powerful women. That's very interesting. And you question, can we get that narrative back? And I would certainly hope that the book that Emma's written is one step in that direction towards being able to reclaim what is, after all, the most important thing that a woman does, and that without it, we wouldn't have any chance of continuing the human race. I mean, it's there's a very interesting thing in an earlier Jared Diamond book where he talks about the fact that women's periods are private, as against, say, the periods of an animal, means that you are enabled, women are enabled to lead completely normal lives when they have their periods, because he has this fantastic analogy of saying, can you imagine if it was a group of 25 dogs sitting around the boardroom table, and one of the dogs, who was female, happened to be on heat, as you would say, then all the rest of the dogs would be desperate to hump her and all the rest of it, and everything would fall apart. And it's just one of those images that I remember reading a very long time ago, and it's just stayed with me. And as I was rereading Emma's book, which I tell you what is absolutely fantastic, and as she said earlier, you'd think, well, what do I need to know about periods? I know everything I need, but in fact, it's an incredibly rich cultural history of how women have been seen, how women have been dismissed, how women's health has been put so far down the agenda. So that's a really great contribution, Vicky. Thank you. And Louise Clark, thank you also for your contribution of saying that I've always engaged my son as well as my daughters in my periods, explaining my mood swings. His girlfriends were always amazed at his understanding of womanhood. Well, lucky them, quite frankly, and good on you, because that's a really, really good point. Regina again, a book for young children, which is a collection of a few stories of periods. First periods when wearing white. I think this would be important because it would expose young boys and girls about life experiences concerning periods. Jessica Cox, thank you too, for I work in a school of which we give out sanitary products, but I wonder about the girls who don't make it to school to ask and don't feel able to. I think we have a long way to go. Now, I think you're absolutely right on that, and that without a doubt, Emma's book does go into that. And I certainly know that from Feeding Britain. And I think and hope I've got Emma back, even if she's looking a bit upside down. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I don't know whether you heard all that.
I heard so much of it, but you couldn't hear me. I am hearing, and hello. I'm very sorry.
So I did like very much that contribution that, periods actually are a superpower. It was a completely correct idea. And will we ever get back to that, where one kind of goes, yippee, I just think about being told it was the curse. And you have
I know.
at the back of your book with some truly weird, very weird, but very awful names.
Yeah, more than 150 names. I think the weirdest one for me, or the one I'll always remember, is Riding the Cotton Unicorn, which I'll just let that percolate. Some people are like, what? I'm like, it's about tampons. But yes, and a lot of them are to do with men as well. The idea of us being out of commission, up on blocks, not available for our usual purposes. I mean, despite me being a very biased correspondent, because my period and I in our bloody war have a very difficult time together, I feel it actually robs me of my power. But some women feel so differently. I do write a letter at the end of the book to my period, sort of acknowledging that we're kind of in it together. And if I hadn't had a period, because I interview a woman in the book an old friend I had actually met traveling, and I never forgot this, but told me the story that she was born without a womb.
Yeah.
And she'd always wanted a period. And, I'm not saying every woman wants children, but the ability to have the option is there because of a period, to have your own children like that. And I do think my son is the one reason I can have a bit of a truce with my period. And it is a total superpower. There's that internet meme, who else could bleed for a month and not for a week every month and not die? Girls are superheroes, women are superheroes. So I'm not there to say you need to talk about your period. It's just that I believe you shouldn't not be able to if you need to, and you should be able to feel good about it if you can, because if it's all wrapped up in a box called shame and with all that negativity, it's just going to stay a really secret, awfully thing to be squeamish about.
Yeah, no, that is so right. And I really congratulate you on this book. And I think there was a fantastic image of this poster that went up of some men putting up a sanitary towel. What was it? We're right up at the end now, but just tell us the story of that, because it's so wacky.
Yes, our marketing team at HQ, who published the book, part of HarperCollins, they really went for it this time for the paperback, and I'm very grateful. But even I was surprised by this one. They secured a billboard, and it was just wonderful. And I'm going to see it on Saturday. I still can't believe I've not made it there yet, but I want to go. I wanted to go when it wasn't raining down the period. But there's a giant sanitary pad, and there's the book, and it says, don't be revolted, lead the revolt, preferably with a tampon behind your ear and a grin on your face, which is a quote from the book. And the best bit was Men at Work, this film that I got sent of these two lovely guys who obviously do outdoor advertising signs in their high-vis jackets, sort of gently, but in very high quality, each blood droplet, which was on the side of an off license, which I feel is good because I like to have a good drink when I'm on my period, so it's quite fitting. And they were giggling because I think it's the most certainly memorable billboard they'll do.
Where is this famous billboard?
It's only there, I think, till the weekend. It's sorry to say, it's just in London. So if you're in London, you can go and see it. Linton Street, which I'm reliably told is near Islington, Angel in Islington.
Well, that's very good for the Angel, and yes, I'm sure that people will be along to see it, and it will be tweeted galore. And I hope that everyone will tweet about tonight. And Emma, thank you so much. You're a wonderful presenter of Woman's Hour. You've made the program incredibly. Just listening to it today, you had politics, you had emotion, you had heart, you had stories, you had news. It's got fantastic vitality. And there's one question I really want to ask before we go, which was that when we were in the spare rib days, we argued all the time about whether newspapers should carry on having women's pages. Everybody had women's pages, of which the Guardian was the best, edited by Mary Stott and Jill Tweedy and other absolute heroes of mine, and my young self. And in the end, they all stopped, but Woman's Hour has remained, and it's very important. I listen to it often, and I think, yeah, we still need this, and it's extraordinary, but we still need it. Is that how you feel?
75. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. I know that debate really, really well. I in fact brought back a digital women's page to the Telegraph, in 2014. And there was a lot to say. And I think while we still have the children, while we still have certain representation issues, while we have equality shrined in the law, but not necessarily carried out in reality, there's still a huge amount to talk about and say. And I am never short of stories. The team are never short of stories. And I think we can insert ourselves more and more into the agenda, and perhaps also bring different focuses because of our other journalism when we do the more mainstream things as well, which I know you'll also know very well about as a journalist. So we've definitely got a lot more to do and say. And if anything, I feel at 75, you know, in some ways it's only, you know, getting going and we'll keep going. But it's, yeah, the day we haven't got anything to say is a problem, but I don't foresee that anytime soon.
Well, in a way, it's sort of like running Feeding Britain. I kind of want to be put out of a job. And in a way, you know, women's pages, etc., in a way want to be put out of a job. But I agree with you, it's not coming anytime soon. And basically all power to your elbow. And thank you, A, for being here, but hugely for writing this book and being so inspiring to so many people, and your bravery and courage, and also your incredibly good writing is super appreciated. So do get the book. It's about bloody time, period. And I can also tell you, having listened to the audio book, Emma's got a wonderful voice, as you all now know, even if it was a bit scratchy at times due to the internet.
I'm so sorry.
No, don't worry, it's not your fault. We all have internet days. I mean, they're like PMT, aren't they? But it's been fantastic to see you, and I'll see you soon. And thank you very, very much. And thank you to all of you and to all your really great questions. They were fantastic. So see you soon. Take care and good night and stay safe.
Thank you.